In 1911, a steel worker in Homestead, Pennsylvania, carried a tin pail that held his entire day. Coffee in the bottom, stew in the middle, pie on top. He worked 12 hours in heat that could kill a man, and that pail kept him alive. Number 14 on this list fed more immigrant workers than any restaurant ever did. Number 3 was eaten cold at the bottom of a coal mine. These 25 meals built America, then vanished when the whistle stopped blowing. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count them down. Number 25, the lard sandwich. Before peanut butter was in every cupboard, there was bread and lard, and for millions of working men, it was the sandwich that got them to the noon whistle. Your great-grandfather would take 2 slices of white bread, spread a thick layer of pork lard across both, and hit it with a heavy pinch of salt. If it was payday and the children had been good, a little sugar went on instead, and that was a treat a boy remembered his whole life. A pound of lard cost about 8 cents in 1915, and 1 pound greased a week of lunches. The fat was pure fuel. A man swinging a sledge or feeding a furnace burned 5,000 calories a shift, and lard delivered them cheap. It sat in the pail all morning without spoiling, without wilting, without going anywhere. Today a dietitian would faint at the sight of it. But a man who ate it worked 12 hours and walked home. We call it poverty food now. Back then it was simply how you survived until supper. Number 24, sardines and soda crackers. Every corner grocery in a mill town kept a wall of little flat tins, and for a nickel, a man had a lunch that needed no refrigeration, no cooking, and no cleaning up. Your great-grandfather would peel back the lid with the key soldered to the bottom, tip a few oily sardines onto a soda cracker, and eat them standing at his machine with the belt still running. The oil in the tin was not waste. He would sop it up with the last cracker so nothing was left. A tin of sardines cost about a nickel in 1920, and the crackers came out of a barrel by the pound. The fish gave him protein and a hit of salt his sweating body was screaming for. Fishermen and cannery men off the coast of Maine and California packed those tins by the millions, and they ended up in the pails of men who never saw the ocean. Today we buy sardines as a health trend and pay $4 a tin. He paid a nickel and called it Tuesday. Number 23, the cold fried AGG sandwich. A fried egg is a breakfast food now, but for a man leaving the house at 5:30 in the dark, it was lunch, and it was still good 4 hours later, cold as a stone. His wife would fry 2 eggs hard in the bacon grease from the morning skillet, slide them between bread while they were still hot, and press the whole thing flat with the heel of her hand. By the time he unwrapped it in the mill, the yolk had set into something firm and rich that held together in one hand. Eggs came from the chickens in the yard or cost about 30 cents a dozen at the store. The bread soaked up the grease and the yolk until the whole sandwich tasted like the inside of a good breakfast. It was warm food eaten cold, and no man complained because, cold or not, it was still an egg. And an egg meant his wife loved him enough to stand at the stove before dawn. Number 22, the bologna sandwich. Every working household in America had a ring or a roll of bologna in the icebox because it was the cheapest meat that still felt like meat. It cost around 25 cents a pound in the 1930s, and it kept for a week. Your great-grandmother sliced it thick, laid 2 rounds on white bread with a swipe of yellow mustard, and wrapped it in waxed paper twisted at the ends. Sometimes she fried the slices first, cutting little notches in the edges so they would not curl, and the sandwich came out warm and blistered and better. But mostly it went in cold, and it was fine cold. A boy in the mill got the same lunch as the foreman, and there was no shame in it because the whole floor smelled like bologna and mustard at noon. It was honest food for honest work. Today we sneer at it. Back then it was the reliable middle of a hard day, and a man was grateful for it every single time. Number 21. The onion sandwich. This is the one people cannot believe was real. When the money ran out 3 days before payday, a man's lunch was a thick slice of raw onion between 2 pieces of bread with a little salt, and, if there was any, a smear of drippings. That was it. Sweet white onions were best, sliced as thin as the knife would allow, and the bread pressed down until the onions softened just enough to bite through clean. An onion cost a penny or two. It filled the belly, it seasoned itself, and the sharp bite of it woke a tired man up better than coffee. Steelworkers and railroad men ate these without embarrassment because they knew exactly what they were doing. They were making it to Friday. The smell followed a man all afternoon, but every other man on the floor smelled the same, so nobody minded. It was the sandwich of the last stretch, the meal that said the week was almost beaten. Number 20, molasses bread. Before every child had jelly on their sandwich, the sweetener in a working man's pail was blackstrap molasses, poured thick over bread and folded over on itself. A quart of molasses cost about 15 cents and lasted a family a month, and it was the cheapest sweetness money could buy. Your great-grandmother would spread it dark and gleaming across a heel of bread, and it soaked in until the bread turned soft and heavy and almost like cake. The molasses gave a fast rush of energy that a man could feel in his arms an hour later, and it carried iron and minerals that nobody knew to name but everybody's body used. Southern mill workers and northern factory hands both packed it because molasses did not care what state you were in. It sat in the pail without spoiling, it never went stale, and it turned plain bread into something a hungry man looked forward to. We buy energy gels for 10 times the price now. He had a jar on the shelf. Number 19, the pepper and egg sandwich. Walk into any factory with Italian immigrants in it, and at noon the whole floor smelled like fried peppers, because the pepper and egg sandwich was the lunch that built half the industrial North. Your great-grandmother would fry sweet green peppers slow in olive oil until they went soft and sweet, then scramble 2 or 3 eggs right into the pan and let the whole thing set. She piled it onto a crusty roll and wrapped it tight, and by lunch it had gone cold and firm, and somehow even better, the oil having soaked into the bread. It cost almost nothing. A few eggs, a couple of peppers from the garden, day-old bread that would have gone to waste. This was Friday food during Lent when meat was off the table, but it was so good it never stayed a Friday food for long. Italian grandmothers packed it for men, laying brick, pouring steel, and digging subways. Today it is a rare thing you find at one deli in an old neighborhood. Back then it fed a whole floor. Number 18, the head cheese sandwich. Here is where the modern stomach turns, but your great-grandfather ate it with relish. Head cheese was not cheese at all. It was the meat from a hog's head, simmered down for hours until it fell off the bone, then packed into a mold with its own gelatin until it set into a firm, sliceable loaf, flecked with meat and studded with bits of everything. A German butcher in a mill town sold it for pennies because it used the parts nobody would buy otherwise. Sliced thin on rye with a little vinegar and onion, it was a rich, savory lunch that stuck to a man's ribs through a long afternoon. Nothing on the hog was wasted, because wasting food was a sin a working family could not afford. The men who ate it did not think about what it was. They thought about the fact that it was meat, it was cheap, and it filled them up. We flinch at it now from behind a full refrigerator. They knew better than to be squeamish. Number 17. Liverwurst on rye. In the lunch pails of German and Polish workers, the reliable king was liverwurst, that soft, spreadable sausage the color of a brown paper bag. It cost about 20 cents a pound, packed more nutrition than almost anything else at the counter, and it spread across bread like butter. Your great-grandmother would smear it thick on dark rye, add a slice of raw onion and a spoon of brown mustard, and that sandwich carried a man through the hardest part of the shift. Liver is packed with iron and B vitamins, and a body doing hard labor drank those nutrients up like water. The men who ate liverwurst 3 times a week were healthier than they had any right to be on the wages they earned. It sat in the pail without complaint. It never dried out, and its rich flavor made a plain lunch feel like something. Doctors now tell us to eat organ meat for exactly the reasons our great-grandparents ate it without a single doctor telling them anything. Number 16. The cold meatloaf sandwich. Sunday's meatloaf was never just Sunday's dinner. It was Monday's, Tuesday's, and Wednesday's lunch, sliced cold and laid between bread with a smear of ketchup or the leftover gravy gone thick in the icebox. Your great-grandmother stretched 1 pound of ground beef with soaked bread, an egg, and an onion until it fed the family twice and the working man 3 more times. Cold meatloaf holds together better than warm, so it survived a morning in the pail without falling apart, and the flavors had deepened overnight into something better than the night it was baked. Ground beef ran around 15 cents a pound in the 1930s, and 1 loaf did the work of 3 meals. The man who opened his pail to find a thick slab of his wife's meatloaf on white bread knew he was cared for. It was frugal and it was loving at the same time, which is the whole story of how these families ate. Number 15. Pickled eggs. Every tavern near every factory gate kept a big glass jar of them on the bar, and every wife who canned kept a jar at home, because a pickled egg was protein that never spoiled and always traveled. Hard-boiled eggs went into a brine of vinegar, salt, and pickling spice, and after a week they turned firm and tangy and pink at the edges where the beet juice crept in. Your great-grandfather could drop 2 in his pail and forget about them, and they would be perfect at noon, sharp and salty and satisfying. Eggs were cheap, vinegar was cheaper, and the jar sat in the pantry for months. A man could buy one at the tavern for a couple of pennies with his beer after a shift, or carry his wife's down into the mine where nothing else would keep. They were sour, dense, and filling, the kind of food that quieted a growling stomach fast. We have almost entirely forgotten them. The old bars still have the jar. Here is where things get honest. The lunch pail itself was not a convenience. It was a survival tool designed with the care of a soldier's kit. The tin dinner pail, the kind your great-grandfather carried, had a bottom compartment for coffee or tea, a middle level for the main food, and a shallow tray on top for pie or bread, with a domed lid so nothing got crushed. A man packed it the night before, or his wife packed it before dawn, and it had to hold everything he would eat in a 12-hour stretch. There were no cafeterias in most of those plants. There was no going home for lunch when home was 2 miles away, and the whistle gave you 20 minutes. That pail was the difference between a man who could keep working and a man who collapsed at his post. It was so important that a worker was known by his pail, and losing it was a small disaster. Every meal on this list was shaped by that tin box, by what would survive the morning inside it. Number 14. Baked beans in a jar. This is the one that fed more immigrant workers than any restaurant ever built. Your great-grandmother would bake a pot of navy beans low and slow all day with a piece of salt pork and a spoon of molasses until they went thick and sweet and dark. What did not get eaten at supper got packed into a wide-mouthed mason jar and dropped straight into the pail. A man would set that jar on a warm steam pipe near his station, and by noon, the beans were hot again with no stove in sight. A pound of dried beans cost about a dime and fed a family for days. The beans were dense with protein and slow-burning energy, exactly what a body needed to keep pushing iron for 6 more hours. Boston mill workers, Appalachian miners, and Midwest factory hands all carried them because beans did not care where the plant was. This was the workhorse of the lunch pail, the meal a man could count on when nothing else was in the house. Number 13, the cold pork chop sandwich. When there was a little money, a pork chop fried on Sunday made the finest lunch a man could hope for the rest of the week. Your great-grandmother fried the chops in a cast-iron skillet until the edges browned and the fat crisped, and she cooked 2 extra on purpose. Those went cold into the pail, laid on bread with a little salt, the meat still tender, and the fat still rich around the bone. A man ate around the bone with his fingers, black with the day's work, and did not care. Pork chops cost about $1/4 pound, and buying a few extra to feed the working man's lunch was money well spent. There is something about cold-fried pork that a warm chop cannot match, the fat gone firm, the crust holding its snap. It was a small luxury in a hard life, a reminder that his labor bought a little something better than lard on bread. On the weeks it appeared, it was the best day in the pail. Number 12, sausage and peppers. Come Monday, the Sunday supper of sausage and peppers went back into the pail, and it might have been the best left over in America. Your great-grandmother would brown Italian sausage links with peppers and onions until everything caramelized and slick, then pack the leftovers into a jar or press them into a split roll. Cold or reheated on a steam pipe, the flavors had married overnight into something deep and rich, the bread soaking up all that oil and juice. Sausage cost around 30 cents a pound and stretched with peppers and onions from the garden that cost nothing at all. It was heavy, spiced, filling food, the kind that let a man forget his stomach for hours while he worked. Italian and Polish workers carried versions of this into every heavy industry in the North. It looked like a real dinner in a lunch pail, and for a man far from his own kitchen at noon, looking like a real dinner mattered almost as much as tasting like one. Number 11, cornbread and buttermilk. For Southern men who came north to the mills and the plants, home came in the pail as a wedge of cornbread and a jar of buttermilk. Your great-grandmother baked cornbread in a cast-iron skillet until the bottom went dark and crackling, and a thick slab of it went into the pail with a mason jar of cold buttermilk from the churn. At noon, a man would crumble the cornbread right into the buttermilk and eat it with a spoon, and it was cool and tangy and filling on a hot factory floor. Cornmeal cost pennies, and buttermilk was the leftover from making butter, nearly free. This was Appalachian and Deep South food that rode the Great Migration into Detroit and Chicago and Pittsburgh in a tin pail. It tasted like the hills and the farms these men had left behind. On a bad day, it was the one thing that reminded them who they were and where they came from. Nobody makes it this way anymore. Number 10, the apple butter sandwich. In the fall, when the orchards came in, families put up crocks of apple butter that would last all winter, and it turned a plain slice of bread into something a man looked forward to. Apple butter was apples cooked down for a whole day with a little sugar and cinnamon until it went dark and thick and spreadable, sweet without being sugary. Your great-grandmother spread it thick on bread, and it soaked in just enough to make the whole sandwich soft and rich. It cost almost nothing because the apples were windfalls from the yard and the sugar was the only real expense. It never spoiled, it never wilted, and it was the sweet note in a pail full of salt and grease. Pennsylvania Dutch and Appalachian families packed it by the crock. A working man with an apple butter sandwich had a little sweetness waiting for him at the bottom of a bitter shift, and that small thing was enough to keep a man going. Number 9, hard-boiled eggs and a twist of salt. The simplest thing in the pail was often the most important. 2 or 3 hard-boiled eggs, still in the shell, with a little twist of paper holding a pinch of salt, and a man had protein that survived anything the morning could throw at it. Your great-grandmother boiled a dozen at the start of the week, and they lived in the icebox, ready to drop into any pail at a moment's notice. A man peeled them one-handed against his machine, dipped each bite in the salt, and ate them fast between the tasks that never stopped. Eggs from the yard cost nothing, and from the store about 30 cents a dozen. They were pure, clean fuel, and they never let a man down. There was no cooking, no spoiling, no fuss, just an egg, some salt, and the certainty of a full belly. Astronauts eat engineered food now for the same reason. The egg was the working man's original perfect portable meal, and it never needed improving. Here is what nobody wants to say plainly. These men were eating to survive labor that would be illegal today. A 12-hour shift in a steel mill was not sitting at a desk. It was standing in heat that blistered skin, breathing air thick with dust and smoke, lifting and hauling until the muscles gave out. A body doing that work needed 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day just to keep from breaking down. And it needed them cheap because the wages were brutal and the family came first. That is why every meal on this list is dense with fat, salt, and slow energy. It was not a lack of taste. It was engineering. The lard, the drippings, the pork, the beans, the eggs, every one of them was chosen because it delivered the most fuel for the fewest cents and survived the longest in a tin pail. These were not sad meals. They were the meals that let a man do the impossible and come home able to do it again tomorrow. We forgot that when the work got easier, the food was never the problem. Number 8, cold pierogi. In the coal country of Pennsylvania and the mill towns of the Great Lakes, Polish and Slovak workers carried pierogi, and cold in the pail, they were still a small miracle. Your great-grandmother made them by the hundreds on the weekend, dumplings of soft dough stuffed with mashed potato and cheese or sauerkraut, boiled and then fried in butter until the edges browned. The ones that did not get eaten went cold into the pail, and a man could eat them with his fingers, dense and filling and rich with butter, even at room temperature. Flour, potatoes, and a little cheese cost almost nothing, and a Sunday's work made a week of lunches. This was the food of the old country carried into the American mind, a taste of home 1,000 miles and an ocean away from where it was born. The whole ethnic neighborhood ran on it. Today, pierogi are a specialty item in a freezer case. Back then, they were what got a coal miner through a shift in the dark. Number 7, smoked kielbasa and bread. The other pillar of the Polish lunch-pail was smoked kielbasa, a horseshoe of sausage that needed no refrigeration and no cooking to be a meal. Your great-grandfather would cut a few thick coins of it, lay them on dark bread with mustard, and that was lunch that could sit in a warm mill all morning and be perfect at noon. Smoked kielbasa kept for weeks because the smoking cured it, and it packed a heavy punch of protein and fat and garlic that a laboring body devoured. A ring cost around 40 cents and fed a man for several days. Some men just ate the sausage plain, gnawing off the end and following it with a hunk of bread. It was food built for exactly this life, cured to travel, dense to fill, spiced to satisfy. The Polish neighborhoods around the steel mills of Buffalo and Cleveland and Pittsburgh ran on this sausage. It was the taste of the shift, the smell of the pail, and every man who carried it knew it would never let him down. Number 6. The souse and scrapple sandwich. Down in the Pennsylvania Dutch country and across the working South, nothing went to waste when a hog was killed, and what came of it fed men for weeks. Souse was a pickled loaf of meat and gelatin, tangy and firm, sliced onto bread with vinegar. Scrapple was the trimmings and the cornmeal cooked together into a loaf, sliced thick and fried until crisp on Sunday, then packed cold into the pail. Your great-grandfather ate both without a second thought, because both were meat, and meat was precious. A loaf of scrapple cost under 20 cents and lasted a week. Fried crisp on the outside and soft within, it was a rich, savory thing that filled a man up and cost the butcher almost nothing to make. These were the meals of thrift raised to an art, the whole animal honored down to the last scrap. We buy the same idea now under fancy names and call it nose to tail. They called it not going hungry. Number 5, fried potato and onion sandwich. When the meat ran out and payday was still days away, a skillet of fried potatoes and onions was supper, and cold in the pail the next day it was lunch. Your great-grandmother sliced raw potatoes thin, fried them slow in bacon grease with a heap of onions until everything went golden and soft, and packed the leftovers between 2 slices of bread. Pressed flat and gone cold, the potatoes soaked into the bread, and the whole thing held together like a proper sandwich. A 50-pound sack of potatoes cost a few dollars and fed a family for weeks, and the grease was saved in a can on the back of the stove. This was pure, cheap fuel, starch and fat, exactly what a man burning through a hard shift needed. It cost almost nothing, and it filled every corner of an empty stomach. There was no meat in it and no shame in it, because on the weeks it appeared everyone in the mill was eating some version of the very same thing. Number 4, the dinner pail stew. Here is the trick that turned a tin pail into a hot kitchen 100 feet underground. A man would pack a sealed jar or the pail's own inner tin with stew, beans, or soup his wife made the night before, and when the shift started, he set it against a steam pipe, a warm boiler, or the side of a furnace. By the noon whistle, the food was steaming hot, cooked all over again by the heat of the plant itself. Miners did the same thing with a candle or a carbide lamp under the pail. Your great-grandfather ate a hot meal in a place with no stove, no fire he was allowed to light, and no way to warm food except the machine he was killing himself to run. It was resourcefulness, born of pure necessity. A pot of beef stew stretched with potatoes and barley cost pennies a serving and fed him hot in the cold and dark. This was not a recipe. It was ingenuity. It was a man refusing to eat cold when the whole plant was on fire around him. Number 3, the coal miner's Cornish pasty. This is the one eaten cold at the bottom of a coal mine, and it may be the most perfectly designed working meal ever made. The Cornish pasty came to America with copper and coal miners from England, and it was engineered from the ground up for a man underground. Beef, potato, onion, and rutabaga were sealed inside a sturdy crust folded into a half-moon with a thick rope of dough crimped along one edge. That crimp was a handle. A miner with hands black with coal or poisoned with arsenic and lead held the pasty by the crust, ate the clean middle, and threw the dirty handle away. The thick crust kept the filling hot for hours, or made it fine to eat cold, and the whole thing was a complete dinner in one sealed package. Your great-grandmother crimped his initials into the corner so he knew which was his. Down in the dark, warmed by a lamp or eaten cold against a timber, that pasty was home. Nothing was ever built better for the pail. Number 2, coffee in the growler. Before the pail held any food at all, it held coffee, because coffee was not a luxury for these men. It was medicine, warmth, and the only thing that got them through the last brutal hours. The bottom tier of the dinner pail was made to carry it, and men filled it strong and black and sweet, sometimes a full quart. On a cold morning shift, a man wrapped his hands around that warm tin before he touched anything else. The sugar gave him a quick jolt, the caffeine kept him upright, and the heat, held against a steam pipe, lasted till noon. A pound of coffee cost around 20 cents and lasted a working family a week or more. Some men drank it lukewarm at 10 and cold at 2 and were grateful both times. It was the constant in every pail, the one thing a man would not go without, the small warmth in a day made of iron and fire. When the food was gone, the coffee was still there, and it was enough. Number 1, the working man's sandwich, whatever it held. At the very top of this list is not a single recipe, because the truth is plainer and more important than any recipe. It was 2 slices of bread and whatever the house could spare. Some weeks it was bologna and mustard. Some weeks it was a fried egg. Some weeks it was lard and salt, or a raw onion, or apple butter, or nothing but drippings scraped from the pan. The bread was always there because bread was cheap, and the filling told you exactly how the family was doing that week without anyone ever having to say a word. Your great-grandmother wrapped it in waxed paper the night before, and her whole heart went into deciding what she could afford to put inside. A loaf cost a nickel. The rest was love and arithmetic. That sandwich fed the men who poured the steel and dug the coal and built the roads and raised the cities, one 12-hour shift at a time. It was never fancy. It never needed to be. It was proof that someone at home believed a hard day's work was worth feeding, and that a tired man was worth the trouble of waking up early for. That is the meal we should remember most. Here is my challenge. Pack one of these this week and eat it at noon, wherever you work. The bologna and mustard, the fried potato sandwich, the beans hot off a warm surface, the coffee in a thermos strong and sweet. Then, tell me in the comments if it carried you through the afternoon the way it carried them through 12 hours of fire. Because these were not sad lunches. They were the fuel that built this country, packed by hand in a tin pail before the sun came up. Your great-grandfather ate this way. Now you know how.